If I had known the homeless man I helped that night was actually my future father-in-law, the elusive and intimidating Harrison Montgomery, I suppose it wouldn't have changed what I did. I still would have refused his $5 tip. I still would have placed the crumpled bill back into his trembling hand and told him that in my house, kindness is free. But maybe I would have steadied my breath. Maybe I would have understood the storms hidden behind his pale blue eyes, and maybe I would have realized that this moment was not an accident, but a hinge in time, a quiet shift that would upend my entire life. But that night, to me, he was only an old man shivering in the rain. Portland was drowning under one of those merciless winter downpours that scrape every ounce of warmth off the city. The neon signs flickered in the puddles like fractured mirrors, and the street outside the Harbor Light Diner looked washed out and forgotten. Inside, the ancient heater rattled without much enthusiasm, and I stood behind the counter wiping the same spot for the 5th time just to keep my hands from shaking. My name is Emma Carter, and exhaustion had begun to settle into me like permanent residency. 4 double shifts that week, shoes that had long stopped keeping water out, an apron stiff with old stains. 27 years old and already feeling twice that age. Life wasn't collapsing yet, but it leaned heavily in that direction. Rent overdue, medical bills for my mother growing each month. My fiancé Ethan doing everything he could to convince me we would be fine while I pretended to believe him. Pretended I deserved the world he came from. Pretended I wasn't terrified that one day he would see just how small and worn down my life really was. Then the bell over the diner door chimed, letting in a slice of cold air that slapped my cheeks. When I looked up, he stood there, thin, drenched, wrapped in a heavy oversized coat that looked like it belonged to someone much bigger. Water dripped from the hem to the floor, forming small dark circles on the faded tiles. The late-night regulars stiffened. My manager, Phil, muttered something impatient under his breath. We had seen plenty of homeless men wander in seeking warmth, and Phil's compassion was always the first thing to evaporate. But when the old man lifted his head, his eyes met mine. Pale blue, clear, eyes that seemed out of place in such a weather-beaten face. For just a moment, I felt pinned by that gaze as if he were looking for something inside me. He moved slowly toward the booth near the radiator, each step careful and deliberate. I knew Phil was moments from throwing him out, so I grabbed a bowl of hot tomato soup and a piece of toast before anyone could protest. I set it in front of him gently. He thanked me, his voice rough and papery. When he tried to hand me $5 as a tip, his fingers shook from cold or age or both. I pressed it back into his palm and closed his fingers around it. "Keep it. Your dignity matters more than a tip." He froze, slightly studying me again, measured quiet, almost like he was taking notes. Our conversation was brief, but every second felt strangely heavy. When he finally stood and made his way to the door, he paused. Rain sheeted behind him silver and relentless. He watched me through the fogged glass, then disappeared into the storm. I didn't know it yet, but that $5 bill had already triggered the first domino. It was already unlocking doors I didn't know existed, already pulling me toward a powerful family I never imagined entering and a storm far greater than the one outside. That night, everything shifted. Most people who came into the Harbor Light Diner only ever saw the apron. The tired waitress who refilled their coffee apologized when the kitchen messed up and smiled, even when her feet felt like they were splitting in half. They didn't see the woman underneath, the one who woke up every morning clinging to hope like it was a fraying rope. My name is Emma Carter, and for most of my life I've been running on grit caffeine and the quiet fear that everything I loved could vanish if I blinked too long. I didn't grow up in poverty, but I grew up close enough to feel its breath on my neck. My mother worked 2 jobs until her body began to betray her. When she developed heart complications, everything shifted. I became the adult, the caretaker, the bill payer, the worrier. Medical debt is a shadow that follows you everywhere, creeping into decisions, dreams, even love. I learned to stretch $20 across a week. I learned how to pretend a cracked phone screen didn't bother me. I learned how to accept the kind of exhaustion that never fully leaves your bones. The diner wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was stable. It kept the lights on barely. It kept medicine in the cabinet sometimes. and it gave me something to hold on to when life spun too fast. The only part of my life that felt like it belonged in a different universe was Ethan. Ethan Montgomery, my fiancé. Ethan with his warm smile, his gentle hands and eyes that always seemed to see more in me than I could see in myself. We met at the community clinic where I brought my mother for routine checkups. He was a volunteer coordinator helping low-income families manage appointments and insurance paperwork. I always thought people like him existed only in books. He had this way of speaking softly but meaningfully, as if every word he offered had weight. And when he asked me out, I almost said no out of instinct. People like him don't date people like me. But he insisted there was something about me he couldn't forget. He said I walked through the world like someone who refused to break. And somehow, between diner shifts and clinic visits between fear and hope, I let myself fall for him. The night he proposed, he did it in the simplest way imaginable under a street lamp outside my apartment, holding a ring he said belonged to his grandmother. I cried because it was beautiful and because I was terrified. I had never seen the world he came from, but I knew pieces of it through reputation. The Montgomerys weren't just wealthy. They were architectural, generationally built, the kind of family whose last name appeared in museums and on university donor plaques. And at the head of it was Harrison Montgomery, Ethan's father. A name spoken with reverence and fear, a financial titan, a kingmaker, a man who had stepped back from public life so abruptly that half the city whispered theories about him. He was private to the point of myth, inaccessible to everyone except a handful of people. Even Ethan barely saw him. So when Ethan told me his family wanted to meet me someday, dread pooled in my stomach like cold lead. I wasn't naive. I knew how the wealthy looked at people like me. I had cleaned enough tables for them, endured enough condescending smiles, enough dismissive nods, enough times of being ignored entirely. I imagined Harrison Montgomery sitting in some grand leather chair, looking at me the way some diners looked at the check left on their table, evaluating the cost and finding it disappointing. Ethan always told me I was overthinking it, that his father cared more about character than class, that I was exactly the kind of person he needed to meet. But part of loving someone also means knowing which of their beliefs are wishful thinking. And wealthy families rarely welcome outsiders without a fight. Still, I tried. I worked extra shifts to save for a dress that wouldn't embarrass Ethan. I learned the basics of wine etiquette on my cracked phone screen. I practiced smiling in the mirror until I didn't look like I was bracing for impact, because I loved him and I wanted to be enough. But some fears linger no matter how hard you try to drown them. Some insecurities curl into the corners of your mind like vines creeping in when you least expect it. That night at the diner when I gave the homeless man soup and refused his $5 tip, I wasn't thinking about the Montgomerys or wealth or social classes colliding. I was just thinking about dignity, about the one thing I had learned to protect fiercely in others, even when I struggled to protect it in myself. I didn't know that kindness, the thing I thought made me ordinary, was the one thing that would soon pull me into the orbit of a man whose decisions could change nations. I didn't know that while I stared down at that $5 bill, fate was drawing a straight line from my booth to the grand estate on Hawthorne Ridge where a reclusive billionaire was about to hold my future in his hands. I didn't know that I was being measured, not just as a person, but as a future Montgomery. And I had no idea that the old man in the rain had been measuring me first. The night of the test didn't announce itself with thunder or drama. It arrived quietly, slipping into my life the way rain slides under a door. I was halfway through wiping down the chipped counter when the bell over the diner door jingled again, sharper than usual, as if the wind had pushed it with purpose. I didn't look up at first. My feet were aching, my head pounding from lack of sleep, and the air smelled like burnt bacon mixed with wet coats. I just wanted the shift to end. But then, Phil barked something harsh under his breath, and that was when I finally lifted my eyes. He stood in the doorway, soaked through the same old man I had helped before, though at the time I couldn't place where I had seen those pale blue eyes. His coat looked heavier tonight, sagging under the weight of the rain, and he held himself with a fragile kind of pride, as if determined not to look as cold as he obviously was. Water pooled under him, forming dark circles on the cracked black and white tiles. The other customers stiffened, retreating into themselves the way people often do when faced with something uncomfortable. Phil crossed the diner with quick, irritated steps, cutting him off before he could move any farther. "Sorry, old-timer, we're full tonight." No loitering. The man hesitated, bracing himself against his cane. "I can pay for a cup of coffee," he rasped, though the shake in his hand gave him away. Phil scoffed. "Sure you can. You smell like rain in the sidewalk. You'll scare off paying customers. Out now." Something snapped inside me. Not loudly, but sharply, the way thin ice cracks beneath your heel. "Phil, stop." He turned his annoyed glare on me. "Emma, don't start. We're not a shelter. He's a human being," I said, stepping between them before I fully realized what I was doing. "He needs warmth, and it's pouring outside. Let him sit." Phil threw his hands up, muttering about soft-hearted employees and liability issues, but he didn't stop me as I guided the man toward the booth by the radiator. He lowered himself slowly, as though each movement cost him. His clothes were soaked, his beard matted, and his fingers trembled with age or cold or hunger. Maybe all three. "I'll bring you something warm," I said quietly. "You don't have to pay." He stared at me, those pale blue eyes searching my face as if I were a puzzle he was trying to solve. Then he nodded once slowly, like someone acknowledging a truth they hadn't expected to find. I brought him soup, extra bread, and coffee. Phil complained behind me, but I didn't care. I set the food down gently and asked if he needed anything else. He didn't reach for the spoon at first. He just watched me. Why, he finally asked, his voice thin and frayed. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." I shrugged, though the question dug deeper than he realized. "Because you're cold and hungry. Because life is already hard enough. Because I've watched too many people walk past others in pain and pretend they didn't see it." He studied me again longer this time, almost as if memorizing something. "People don't give kindness for free anymore," he muttered, not without wanting something back. I exhaled softly. Not everyone wants something in return. Some of us do it because we know what struggle feels like. He stirred his soup, silent for a moment. When he finally ate, he did it slowly, savoring each spoonful like it had been years since he'd tasted something warm. And maybe it had. When the bowl was empty, he reached into the inside pocket of his heavy coat. My eyes flicked toward Phil, bracing for a lecture about unpaid tabs. But instead, the old man pulled out a single $5 bill. Clean, crisp, out of place in his weathered hands. He placed it carefully on the table. "For your kindness," he said. I shook my head and pushed it back toward him. "Keep it. Please. You need it more than I do." He stiffened slightly as if offended. "I have my pride, young lady. Don't pity me." "It's not pity," I said gently. "It's respect. Money is for surviving. Dignity is for living. You're my guest tonight. Let me do this for you." Something shifted then almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened, his eyes softened, and for one brief moment, he looked less like a man who had been beaten down by life and more like someone who had once carried the world on his shoulders. He closed his fingers slowly around the bill, his hand trembling. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Completely." He nodded a small but a decisive movement, then rose to leave. As he walked toward the door, he paused. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights. He looked back at me, his face unreadable, and then stepped out into the storm without another word. I didn't know this was a test. I didn't know I had just passed something that would change my life. And I didn't know that the man disappearing into the rain wasn't any homeless man at all, but the father of the man I loved, watching me, the way a king watches the future of his kingdom. The morning after the rain-soaked encounter began, like any other, with the gritty hum of the city, waking up and my alarm vibrating against the nightstand like it was as exhausted as I was. I rolled out of bed, muscles stiff, eyelids heavy, feeling the kind of fatigue that didn't just settle in the body, but in the soul. My apartment was small, cluttered with secondhand furniture, and the quiet hush of a home built on survival rather than comfort. I made coffee so weak it hardly deserved the name checked on my mother before leaving for her checkup later, and tried to forget the lingering image of the old man's pale blue eyes studying me through the diner window as he disappeared into the night. But the universe didn't intend for me to forget. Not that day. By noon, while I was folding napkins behind the counter at the Harbor Light Diner, the door swung open and Ethan rushed in, cheeks flushed from the cold air. "Emma," he said, breathless, "my father wants to meet you. Tonight." The napkin slipped from my hands. "What?" "Your father. I thought he was still in New York. He came back early. He specifically asked for you. Tonight." My stomach tightened. The Harrison Montgomery wanted to meet me. A man so private the media had given up chasing him years ago. A man who moved like a shadow in the world of power and wealth. A man whose approval could alter the trajectory of our relationship. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, I'll be ready." But one part of me whispered, "Why tonight of all nights? Why so suddenly? And why now, when last night's encounter with the homeless man still felt like a weight on my chest?" By dusk, I stood in front of the Montgomery estate at Hawthorne Ridge, a sprawling stone mansion that looked like it had been carved out of old money and older secrets. The driveway stretched longer than any street I'd grown up on, lined with manicured hedges and lanterns that glowed with soft golden light. It didn't feel like arriving at someone's home. It felt like approaching a throne. Ethan squeezed my hand as we walked toward the giant oak doors. "Don't be nervous. He's tough, but he's fair. He cares about integrity. You'll be great." I tried to believe him, but the air around the mansion felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. When the doors opened, a butler greeted us with a stiff nod. "Miss Carter, Mr. Montgomery is expecting you." Ethan murmured something under his breath that sounded like encouragement, but it did little to settle the tremor in my hands. As we stepped inside, the atmosphere swallowed me whole. The interior was breathtaking and intimidating, each hallway lined with oil paintings of ancestors whose stern eyes seemed to follow me. Everything smelled faintly of polished wood, old books, and wealth that stretched back generations. The staff moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps soft, their expressions unreadable. But as I passed a pair of housekeepers whispering near a doorway, I caught a fragment of conversation. "He went out again last night, in disguise. Why would he do that in this weather, testing people? Always testing." I paused mid-step. The words hit me like a gust of cold wind. Testing people in disguise. My heart thudded in my chest. It couldn't be related, I told myself. It was coincidence. Just coincidence. Ethan tugged gently on my hand, pulling me into an enormous sitting room lit by a crackling fireplace. The room was elegant but imposing, with tall windows and a grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. "Sit here," Ethan said softly. "He'll be down any moment." I perched on the edge of the velvet sofa, my palms damp, my breath shallow. The clock ticked each sound, stretching into my nerves. In the hallway, footsteps echoed, slow, measured, familiar in a way that made my pulse trip. And then the doors opened. I didn't see his face first. I saw the cane, the same wooden cane I had watched brace against the diner tiles. Then the coat not soaked this time, but the same shape, the same weight. And finally, the eyes, pale blue, clear, cutting. The old man from the rain stepped into the light, but he was no longer hollow-cheeked or hunched. Clean-shaven, his hair combed back, wearing a tailored suit that fit him like command itself. He stood tall, proud, powerful. Not a homeless man. Not a wanderer. But Harrison Montgomery, billionaire kingmaker, the most feared and respected man in Oregon. My fiancé's father. The world tilted. My breath caught, and my mind struggled to put the pieces together. The man I had served soup to. The man I had defended. The man whose $5 tip I had refused. He wasn't poor. He wasn't helpless. He had been testing me. Ethan didn't know. The staff didn't know. No one knew except him. And now, me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they could hear it echoing off the marble floors. Harrison's gaze locked onto mine, not with cruelty, but with the piercing intensity of a man who had orchestrated every second of the encounter. "Emma Carter," he said calmly, as if we were strangers meeting for the first time. "We need to talk." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even reconcile the two halves of the man standing in front of me. The soaked, trembling figure from the diner booth and the imposing patriarch of the Montgomery Empire overlapped in my mind like two transparencies being forced into alignment. My pulse hammered in my ears as Harrison Montgomery stepped farther into the sitting room, each stride steady and deliberate, the way someone moves when they're used to being obeyed before they even speak. Ethan rose to greet him, unaware of the hurricane gathering inside my chest. "Dad, this is Emma. You finally get to meet her." Harrison didn't look at his son. His gaze remained fixed on me, examining, dissecting, searching for something I didn't understand yet. He tilted his head slightly, and in that instant, I saw it the smallest glimmer of recognition in his eyes, though he pretended not to know me. My knees felt weak. I forced my voice into existence. "We have met." Ethan turned toward me, confusion creasing his brow. "When?" But the question died on his lips as Harrison raised a hand for silence. "Sit down, both of you." His tone left no room for argument. I sank into the velvet seat, my fingers gripping the cushion while Ethan hesitated before sitting beside me. The room felt colder now, the crackling fireplace suddenly insufficient. Harrison took the armchair across from us, resting both hands over the ornate carved handle of his cane. For a moment, no one spoke. I could feel the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. Harrison inhaled slowly, as though preparing himself for a confession. "Emma, I owe you the truth. What you saw last night, what you think you saw, was only part of the story." I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "You were testing me." His gaze sharpened, a faint flicker of approval crossing his face. "Yes, I was." Ethan looked between us, bewildered. "Testing Dad? What are you talking about?" Harrison finally turned to his son. "There are things you don't understand yet, things about this family, things about protecting what we've built." His words sliced the air, and Ethan's expression tightened with frustration. But Harrison didn't elaborate. He returned his attention to me, and suddenly the room felt smaller, as if all the oxygen had been drawn to the place where his gaze met mine. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from me, people who smiled as they sharpened their knives, people who believed money was synonymous with worth. When I stepped away from public life, it wasn't to retire. It was to observe, to study the world without the filter of my name, to see who people were when they thought I was nothing. And you, Emma, you surprised me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not from pride, but from the weight of being scrutinized without knowing it. Ethan leaned forward. "Dad, this is insane." You disguised yourself as Harrison raised a hand again. "I needed to know who she was. If you marry her, she becomes part of this family. Part of a dynasty that has been targeted, manipulated, and betrayed for decades. Your mother." He paused, his jaw tightening, grief drifting like a shadow across his face. "Your mother trusted the wrong people. They destroyed her reputation, her peace, and nearly destroyed this family. I will not let that happen again." My throat tightened at the pain in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't expected from a man with his power. But knowing his motives didn't erase the sting. "You could have just talked to me," I said quietly. "You didn't have to deceive me." He studied me with surprising gentleness. "You're right. But talk reveals only the words people choose. Behavior reveals truth." I had no answer to that. Ethan shook his head, still struggling to catch up. "So you dressed like a homeless man and went into a random diner to test Emma Harrison's eyes narrowed faintly." "Nothing I do is random." My heart dropped. The more he spoke, the more I realized just how calculated the encounter had been. I didn't know whether to feel flattered or violated. Harrison leaned back slightly, tapping the cane against the carpet. "When you refused the $5, you said something I haven't heard in decades, something that stopped me in my tracks. You told me my dignity mattered more than your tip. You treated me as though I still had worth, even when I presented myself as someone the world had forgotten." He paused, his voice softening with something almost like disbelief. "I built an empire on the assumption that dignity had to be earned. You reminded me it could also be given." I stared at him, unable to look away, my emotions tangled in a knot that felt impossible to undo. Part of me wanted to recoil from the manipulation. Part of me understood it, and part of me, the deepest part, felt the gravity of what had happened. Harrison continued, speaking, his voice lower now. I don't trust easily. I don't forgive easily. But I saw who you were when you thought no one important was watching. That is the truest version of a person, and that is the version I needed to meet. Ethan reached for my hand and squeezed it gently, his expression softening as understanding slowly settled into him. Dad, she's the woman I love. Harrison nodded. And now I wanted to see if she deserved to be loved by you. My breath caught. The implication hit me fully. This wasn't a casual test. This was the test. A test of character, of heart, of worthiness to enter a world far more treacherous than the diner I worked in. And somehow, without meaning to, without preparing, without even knowing I had passed it. But the night was not done unraveling, because passing Harrison Montgomery's test was only the beginning of the war waiting outside his door. In the minutes after Harrison delivered his verdict, the room felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the tension leaking out of my chest. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victorious. I had passed his test, the most impossible test of my life, one I hadn't even known I was taking. But instead, a strange hollowness pressed against my ribs. Maybe it was the weight of the deception. Maybe it was the feeling of being studied like a specimen under a microscope. Or maybe it was the realization that even now, even after everything, Harrison wasn't done deciding my worth. He leaned back slightly, his hands folded over the top of his cane, studying me with an expression I couldn't decipher. You did well, Emma. Your instinct is compassion. That is rare, but is it enough? The words struck deeper than I expected, slicing clean through the thin confidence I had tried to gather around myself. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? His gaze sharpened. You're entering a world that chews people up, a world where sincerity is exploited and kindness is mistaken for weakness. You have a good heart, but good hearts can break. Ethan bristled. Dad, that's unfair. She has nothing to prove. Harrison didn't look at him. His eyes remained locked on mine, and in that moment, I felt like there was no escaping his judgment, like the entire future of my relationship with Ethan was suspended between his next few words. I'm not questioning her character, he said. I'm questioning her durability. The Montgomery name is a double-edged sword. It attracts loyalty from some, but it attracts predators from most. And when they can't get to me, they will go through you. They will scrutinize you. They will test you. They will try to break you. I flinched before I could stop myself. The idea of being hunted, examined, picked apart by strangers made my stomach twist with nausea. I had spent most of my life trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention to the cracks in my circumstances. The thought of being under a spotlight I couldn't control felt unbearable. Harrison's voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. I need to know if you can withstand that. If you can protect Ethan as much as he wants to protect you. My chest tightened. That wasn't what I expected him to say. Protect Ethan. From what? Ethan leaned forward, his voice desperate. I don't need protection. I need partnership. And Emma is that. Harrison still didn't look at him. He looked only at me, and something inside me fractured under the weight of it. I wanted to answer him. I wanted to prove him wrong. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could survive that world. I didn't know if love alone was strong enough armor. And the silence that spilled out of me was enough for Harrison to see every insecurity I had tried to hide. His expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A sharpness, a pullback, as if my hesitation confirmed every fear he had. Ethan exhaled, frustrated, turning toward me. Emma, say something. Tell him. But the words wouldn't come. I felt suddenly exposed, small like the diner girl with the threadbare shoes had been dropped into a coliseum. Harrison's eyes lowered. I see. That was all he said. 2 words that sliced clean through my heart. I stood abruptly, the room tilting as adrenaline surged through me. I'm overwhelmed. I need some air. Ethan reached for me, but my body moved before his hand touched mine. Wait, we can talk. I shook my head. Not here. Not like this. I left the sitting room, my legs carrying me down the long marble hallway. The house seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of wealth and shadows. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears loud enough to drown out Ethan calling after me. I pushed open a side door and stepped into the cold night. The air hit my face like a slap. For a few seconds, I just breathed, gripping the railing of the stone balcony, staring out at the sprawling grounds lit by the soft glow of garden lamps. My chest tightened and a wave of humiliation washed over me. I had already failed. I had already shown weakness. And weakness in this world was blood in the water. I didn't hear the footsteps until someone cleared their throat behind me. I expected Ethan. But when I turned, it was Avery, Ethan's older sister. Tall, elegant, wrapped in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She leaned against the doorway, a glass of wine in hand, smirking. So, the charity case finally meets the king. The words hit like ice. I stiffened. I'm not. She waved a manicured hand. Spare me. You think you're the first girl Ethan brought home? You think you're the first one Dad tested? You're not. But you are the least impressive. My stomach twisted. Avery stepped closer, lowering her voice. Let me explain something to you. This family doesn't bend. It doesn't soften. It doesn't change for anyone. If you stay with Ethan, the press will shred you. The board will mock you. People will call you a gold digger. They'll dig into your mother's medical records, your rent history, your bank statements, everything. My breath hitched. Avery smirked again, pleased by the effect of her words. Dad is right, you know. You won't survive here. Ethan deserves someone bred for this life, not someone dragged into it. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The worst part wasn't her words. It was the tiny, awful part of me that wondered if she was right. I felt my throat tighten again as she walked past me, her perfume lingering like a taunt in the cold air. And then she said the words that cracked me completely. Dad will never choose you. And neither will this family. The door closed behind her, leaving me alone. The world blurred as tears burned their way down my cheeks. I had passed Harrison's test, but I had lost something far more important, my certainty, my footing, my place beside Ethan, and I wasn't sure I could get it back. The days that followed were a blur of tension pressed so tightly against my ribs that breathing felt like a skill I had forgotten. I didn't tell Ethan about Avery cornering me on the balcony. I didn't tell him about the venom in her voice or the certainty with which she predicted my downfall. Part of me feared that repeating the words out loud would make them real. Another part feared that he already suspected them to be true. Harrison didn't reach out to me after that night. Neither did Avery. The silence from the Montgomery estate echoed louder than any confrontation, and I found myself shrinking into it, wondering if maybe that was the point. I returned to the diner, clinging to the simple rhythm of refilling cups and wiping counters, but even that felt different now. The old man I had once fed had been replaced in my mind by the billionaire who had judged my worth with a single look. Phil, sensing something was off, tried to pry it out of me with grumbles disguised as concern. Did the fancy boyfriend dump you? Did the rich folks finally chew you up? I ignored him and kept working, but the customers who once looked through me now watched me with curiosity. It was subtle, but I felt it like a splinter under my skin. Someone had been talking, and I didn't have to wait long to find out who. One afternoon, as I stepped outside for a breath of air, my phone buzzed with a notification. At first, I thought it was a bill reminder. Instead, it was a news alert from a tabloid site known for digging up the worst in people. Billionaire heir's mystery fiancé exposed. My stomach dropped. I opened the link with trembling fingers. There, plastered across the top of the page, was a photo of me leaving the clinic with my mother months ago. She was pale, leaning on my arm, and I looked exhausted. The caption beneath it read, "Is this the woman set to marry Ethan Montgomery? Debt, illness, low income, questionable past." The article twisted every hardship of my life into a stain. They listed my address, the diner, my mother's medical bills. They quoted an unnamed close family source who claimed I was manipulating Ethan for financial gain. And at the bottom of the article, almost like a signature, was a statement from Avery Montgomery herself. "We want what's best for Ethan. Loyalty must be proven, not assumed. A chill raced through my body. She had done it. She had thrown the first punch. The next day brought the second. When I arrived at the diner for my shift, a man in a gray suit was waiting outside. He didn't smile. Miss Carter. He handed me an envelope and walked away. Inside was a letter from a law firm representing the Montgomery Family Trust Division. A formal review of your moral suitability to join the Montgomery legacy is underway. Until further notice, your access to the estate and family-related functions is restricted. My chest tightened. I hadn't realized I had been granted access in the first place. But the message was clear. Stay away. You are not welcome. Worse yet, the letter had been carbon copied to Ethan. I called him immediately, panic clawing its way up my throat. Ethan, what is this? Why is a lawyer telling me I'm under review? His voice on the other end sounded strained, tired, and somehow older. I'm so sorry, Emma. This wasn't my idea. My aunt and the board are pushing this. They say marrying you could destabilize the family reputation. My voice cracked. Do you believe that? No. Of course not. But Dad isn't helping. He's been silent, and silence from him means they think he agrees. I felt my knees weaken. Ethan hesitated before speaking again, softer this time. Can we talk tonight at the penthouse? I'll explain everything. I agreed, but as soon as I ended the call, dread settled into my bones. When I arrived at the penthouse, I expected Ethan to greet me. Instead, I walked into a room full of people in designer clothes, holding champagne glasses, whispering behind manicured hands. A charity event. Avery's charity event. Ethan wasn't at the door. He wasn't anywhere near the entrance. Avery, however, was. She spotted me and smiled with icy satisfaction. Oh, look, the help is here. My cheeks flushed. I forced myself to remain steady. I'm looking for Ethan. Avery's smile widened. Of course you are, but he's busy. And you're... She let her gaze drift down my thrift store dress. Out of place. Guests around her laughed lightly, cruelly, the sound brushing against me like sandpaper. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough. You thought Dad's little test was the only one, sweetheart, that was nothing. The real test is surviving us. She clinked her glass against mine without asking wine splashing onto my hand. A toast, she said, eyes hard, to the end of illusions. And then, before I could move or breathe or brace myself, she raised her voice and addressed the small crowd around us. Everyone, this is Emma. You know the girl from the article, the one with the debts, the dying mother, the diner job. A murmur rippled through the group. Disdain, pity, judgment. Someone whispered the word opportunist. Someone else said homewrecker. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blurring. I tried to turn away, but Avery caught my wrist in a gentle, almost friendly gesture that held iron beneath it. Don't run. If you can't handle a little pressure, you certainly can't handle being a Montgomery. My voice shook. Stop, please, just stop. But she didn't. She raised her glass again, her smile sharp as glass. To my brother's latest pet project. May she find a better career path than gold digging. Laughter erupted. It echoed in my skull, rattling against everything I had fought so hard to protect within myself. I felt tears burning at the edges of my eyes, threatening to spill. But before they did, before the humiliation fully consumed me, a deep voice cut through the room like a blade. Enough! The laughter died instantly. Heads snapped toward the balcony entrance. And there stood Harrison Montgomery. Not disguised, not distant, not cold, but furious. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Avery with a force I had never seen before. I was the homeless man she helped. The room froze. Avery's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Harrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of power. Every single thing in that article was twisted or fabricated. And you, Avery, orchestrated it. You will answer for it. A murmur of shock rippled through the guests. Harrison turned toward me next, and for the first time since I had met him, he didn't look like a judge. He looked like an ally. This ends now. But Avery wasn't finished. She stepped forward, eyes burning with resentment. You can't protect her forever. She's not one of us. She never will be. Harrison straightened his presence towering. Watch me. The war had begun, and Avery was only getting started. The morning of the boardroom showdown arrived with the heavy stillness of a storm that hadn't yet broken. I barely slept. My phone buzzed nonstop through the night with calls from unknown numbers reporters desperate for a statement and messages from strangers with opinions about my life they had no right to. The article Avery planted had exploded across social media, fueling a frenzy that turned my existence into entertainment. By sunrise, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a headline. Ethan had called apologizing over and over, his voice hoarse with regret. He wanted to pick me up to drive me to the emergency meeting that had been called at Montgomery Holdings headquarters, but I told him no. Not because I didn't want him with me, but because I needed to reclaim something. My dignity, my footing, the version of myself that existed before the world decided to tear me apart. So I put on the black suit I had bought for potential job interviews months ago. It was simple, slightly loose at the shoulders, but clean and respectable. I tied my hair back, put on minimal makeup, and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the Emma who worked night shifts at the diner. She wasn't the Emma who cowered under Avery's taunts. This Emma was scared, yes, but she was also done being prey. When I arrived at the Montgomery Tower, the sidewalk outside was a battlefield of flashing cameras and chaotic shouting. Security ushered me through the crowd as voices pierced the air around me. Emma, are you a gold digger? Did you trap Ethan? Are you after the inheritance? Do you think you're fit to join the Montgomery family? I kept my gaze forward, refusing to let the cruelty pull me under again. Inside the gleaming marble lobby, the elevators rose like silent monoliths reflecting my pale face back at me. When the doors opened on the top floor, a wave of tension hit me like a physical force. The corridor was lined with assistants and executives whispering frantically, and waiting near the boardroom entrance was Harrison. He stood tall, dressed in the same immaculate suit as the night before, but today there was a hardness in his posture that hadn't been there before. A sharpness like steel, drawn and ready. When he saw me, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not warm, not inviting, but approving. Dad, Ethan said, stepping forward. He looked exhausted too, his tie, slightly crooked eyes ringed with dark circles. When he turned to me, the love and guilt in his expression nearly broke me. I'm so sorry for last night. I should have shut them down sooner. I shook my head. We'll talk after. His eyes softened. After. Harrison cleared his throat. We shouldn't keep the board waiting. The doors opened, revealing a long glass table surrounded by 12 members of the Montgomery Holdings board, men and women in expensive suits, each with a face carved from years of political maneuvering. At the head of the table sat Avery. She looked flawless, composed, victorious. Her smile was polite but triumphant, like a hunter waiting for the kill. When I walked in, her eyes flicked toward me with cool disdain. You shouldn't be here, she said as if scolding a child. This is a corporate meeting, not a charity kitchen. Ethan moved beside me, anger darkening his expression. She has every right. Harrison's voice cut between them like a blade. Sit down, all of you. The air vibrated with tension as we took our seats. Avery folded her hands neatly. Let's begin. In light of recent revelations about Miss Carter, I propose we invoke the moral suitability clause of the Montgomery Charter. Ethan slammed his palm against the table. This is ridiculous! She's done nothing wrong! Avery's stare sliced toward him. Her debts, her mother's hospital bills, her lack of pedigree, her history of financial instability. Ethan shot back, voice rising. None of that defines her character. It defines her liability to this family, Avery countered smoothly. It makes her vulnerable, easily manipulated, a perfect target for people who would love access to our father through her. She turned to the board, letting her voice grow just loud enough. We cannot allow emotion to blind us. We protect this family by removing risks, not embracing them. My hands trembled under the table. The humiliation, the cruelty, the precision of her attack, it all twisted inside me like a knife. Then Harrison stood. The The room immediately stilled. His presence was a force all its own, commanding silence without a word. "Before this circus continues," he said coldly, "there is something you all need to see." He nodded at a technician waiting by the screen. "Play the footage." The large monitor flickered to life, and there, in sharp resolution, appeared the Harbor Light Diner, the timestamp from the night of the storm, the angle from the camera above the register. A hush swept across the room. They watched as the soaked, trembling homeless man walked in. They watched as Phil tried to throw him out. They watched as I stepped between them, defending him. They watched as I brought him soup before anyone else would. And then they watched the moment that had changed everything. The $5 bill. My words. "Keep it. Your dignity matters more than my tip." I felt my cheeks burn as the board members watched my every movement on screen, but Harrison didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on their faces, studying their reactions. When the footage ended, the room was silent. Harrison stepped forward, hands resting on his cane. That was the moment I decided who Emma Carter truly is. She didn't know my name. She didn't know what I controlled, what I owned, or who my son was. She didn't perform for a camera or for praise. She acted on principle, something rare in a world rotting with greed. He turned to Avery, his voice lowering to a chilling calm. "And you twisted her life into a spectacle to protect your ego." Avery's face paled. "Dad, I didn't." Harrison slammed his cane against the floor, the crack echoing like thunder. "Enough." The board flinched. Avery froze. Harrison's voice deepened with the finality of a gavel falling. "Effective immediately, Avery Montgomery is removed from her executive duties and stripped of decision-making authority within Montgomery Holdings." Gasps erupted around the table. Avery stood abruptly, fury blazing across her face. "You can't do that. I am your daughter, and Emma is my future daughter-in-law." Harrison replied evenly, "And I protect what is mine." Avery trembled with rage. "You'll regret this. You're throwing away the company for a stranger." Harrison leaned in eyes diamond hard. "I'm elevating the company by choosing integrity over blood, something you never understood." She looked around wildly, expecting support, but the board members looked away. One by one, they refused to meet her eyes. She stormed out the doors, slamming behind her, the force shaking the room. Then, as the silence settled, Harrison turned to me. "Emma, I have updated my estate plans." A murmur rippled through the board. He continued, 40% of my personal assets will go to you." My breath caught. Ethan's jaw dropped. The board stared in stunned disbelief. Harrison's expression softened just slightly. "I choose you because you reminded me that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in dignity. You saved me from a world that had made me forget that." I wanted to speak, but the words stuck in my throat, overwhelmed by the enormity of everything unfolding. Ethan moved to my side and wrapped his hand around mine, his grip trembling. "This changes nothing about how I feel for you," he whispered. "But everything about how I see myself," I whispered back. Harrison straightened again, facing the board. "This meeting is adjourned. Emma stays. Avery goes. And the future of this family begins here." Cameras flashed in this hallway outside as the doors opened, but for the first time, the noise didn't frighten me. I wasn't prey anymore. I had survived the attack, and the war was shifting in my favor. When the boardroom doors finally closed behind us and the echo of Avery's rage faded into the distance, it felt as though the building itself exhaled. The air shifted. The tension that had wrapped itself around my ribs for days loosened, leaving behind a strange, trembling quiet inside me. Ethan walked beside me down the long, polished hallway, fingers entwined with mine, his grip strong but shaking. Every few steps he glanced at me as if afraid I might break apart or disappear entirely. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you sooner." But I shook my head gently. "You did protect me." In the moment that mattered. He stopped walking, pulling me softly into a secluded alcove near the window overlooking the city. The morning sun fractured against the glass towers, scattering gold light over his face. "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." he said, voice thick. "The way you stood there today, the way Dad defended you. I've never seen him do that for anybody." I swallowed emotion rising so fast it tightened my throat. "I didn't do anything special." He cupped my cheek. "You were yourself. That's what's special." For the first time in what felt like weeks, warmth bloomed in my chest, pushing out the ache of humiliation, fear and doubt that had nearly swallowed me whole. The elevator dinged softly behind us, and Harrison stepped out, walking toward us with his usual deliberate stride. But there was something different about him now, something lighter, as if the weight he'd carried for years had shifted, not gone, but redistributed. "Emma," he said, and I straightened instinctively. "The last of the lawyers are drafting revised documents. All formalities will be finalized within the week." My heart thudded. I still didn't fully understand why he had chosen to leave such an enormous portion of his personal estate to me, and the idea of accepting it felt overwhelming. I opened my mouth to speak, but he lifted a hand. "Before you refuse, because I know you will, I want you to understand something. This isn't a reward. This isn't charity. This is a responsibility." His gaze softened just barely. "You reminded me who I used to be. You reminded me of my wife. She believed that kindness was the only form of wealth that grew the more you spent it. I failed her by forgetting that. You helped me remember." I felt tears gather behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Thank you," I whispered. "Not for the money. For trusting me." Harrison nodded. "Do something meaningful with it. Something she would have been proud of." And in that moment, the answer came to me with clarity so pure, it felt like someone had whispered it into my heart. "I will," I said. "I know exactly what I want to do." Months later, after the dust had settled, after the tabloids moved on to their next scandal, after Avery quietly relocated to Europe under the guise of creative retreat, the Warm Hands Project opened its doors, a foundation dedicated to providing shelter meals and job training to the homeless population of Portland, named after the warmth I had tried to offer the man in the rain that night without knowing who he really was. Harrison attended the opening ceremony standing beside me with a pride he didn't bother to hide. Ethan squeezed my hand as I spoke to the small crowd, my heart full as I shared the story. My story of how $5 I refused had changed everything. And then, one quiet evening, as autumn leaves drifted across the foundation courtyard, Ethan knelt on the ground in front of me. He didn't do it in a mansion. He didn't do it on a stage. He didn't do it with photographers waiting behind hedges. He did it with soft lamplight glowing over his shoulders, the crisp scent of rain returning to the air, and a ring held in trembling fingers. "Emma Carter," he said, voice unsteady. "You are the strongest person I've ever known. You are home to me. Will you marry me?" My yes broke out of me like breath I'd been holding for a lifetime. Laughter and tears mixed as he lifted me into his arms, spinning me in the lamplight. And standing by the courtyard gate, leaning on his cane, Harrison watched us with a small, quiet smile. The kind of smile a man wears when he has finally found peace after years of carrying a heavy heart. The war was over. The wounds were healing. And the life that had once felt so impossibly out of reach was now something I could step into with steady feet. Years later, when people asked me how a $5 bill changed the entire trajectory of my life, I always smiled before answering. Not because the story made me wealthy or known, or because it brought me into the Montgomery family, but because it reminded me of a truth I had nearly forgotten. Every moment of kindness plants a seed in the world, and we never know when or how or through whom it will bloom. I told that story countless times at charity dinners, at foundation events, at small-town gatherings where people came not to hear about wealth, but about the night a diner waitress chose dignity over doubt. And every time I recounted that rain-soaked moment, I could still feel the weight of that $5 bill in my hand, the warmth of the soup I served, the ache in my chest when I looked into the eyes of a man I believed the world had cast aside. I never told it dramatically. I never told it as a tale of fate or luck. I told it simply as the truth. It was, I didn't save him. He saved me. He saved the part of me that feared I wasn't enough, that the world I came from was too small, too fragile, too insignificant. He saved the part of me that doubted whether kindness mattered in a world built on power. And he saved the part of me that, without knowing it, had been preparing to love his son with a strength I didn't yet understand. As the years passed, the Warm Hands Project grew far beyond what I'd imagined. We expanded shelter programs, launched job placement networks, partnered with local clinics, opened kitchens where volunteers served thousands of meals each month. And at every anniversary, Harrison attended leaning on his cane, watching lives transform. His pride was quiet, but unmistakable. It was one of the last places he visited before he passed away peacefully one spring morning. He left behind more than wealth. He left behind a legacy shaped not by empires, but by empathy. One evening, long after his funeral, I walked through the foundation courtyard where Ethan had proposed to me. The lamps glowed softly, the air carried the scent of pine and distant rain, and a young volunteer called out to someone in need, offering a warm meal with the same tone of honesty I had once used in a diner booth. As I watched the exchange, I felt Harrison's presence in the stillness around me, as if he were reminding me that the cycle wasn't finished, it was only beginning. Later that night, I recorded a message for our audience, hoping my words would travel into the lives of someone who needed them. And this is the heart of the CTA. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Kindness is not weakness. It is not charity. It is not a transaction waiting for a reward. Kindness is a form of courage. It is the quiet decision to see the humanity in someone before the world tells you they are worth seeing. It is the belief that dignity belongs to everyone, even when life tries to strip it away. And sometimes kindness becomes the bridge that leads us to the people we were always meant to meet. You never know who is watching. You never know whose life you're touching. You never know when a simple act might echo years into the future. If you were in my place that night, standing in the diner looking at a man who looked lost and cold, what would you have done? Would you have given him warmth? A meal? A moment of dignity? Let me know in the comments. And if my story found you today, I hope it reminded you that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always leaves a mark. Because you never know, your $5 moment might be waiting for you tonight.